What's good? It's Woog. I wanted to talk a little bit about what I consider to be one of the greatest lyrical verses in hip hop history. Now, it's not one of the most famous verses. It's not, Snoop Dogg's Nothing But a G Thing. 1, 2, 3 into the 4. It's not Notorious B.I.G.'s Straight Up Honey, Really I'm Asking, or even It Was All a Dream. Like, there are several more famous verses than the one I'm about to discuss, but just in terms of the line by line, just mind-boggling impressiveness, this one is hard to beat, and it's by Canibus, somebody who had one of the more polarizing reputations in rap. And it was more specifically his last verse. He only has one verse, but it's the last verse on a song that features 4 different MCs. It was on the Lost Boyz, that's South Jamaica Queen's own. Lost Boyz, that's Mr. Cheeks, Freaky Ty, Pretty Lou, Spig Nice. But it was a Lost Boyz song from their second album, Love, Peace, and Nappiness. And that song was called Beast from the East. It goes Mr. Cheeks with the first verse, A+ with the second verse, and this is not the hieroglyphics A+. This is a kid who was on the come up from the East Coast who was building a name for himself, pretty damn lyrical himself as well. He was on the track, and then it was the iconic Redman with the third verse. I mean, that's the person who Eminem shouted out as the greatest MC ever on that Till I Collapse song, right? It goes Reggie, Jay-Z, Tupac, and Big E, Andre from Outkast, Jada, Corrupt, Nas, and then me. It shows you the level of respect Eminem has for Redman. But yeah, Redman has the third verse, and then Canibus just takes over the song with the fourth verse. His verse is so good that if you find that Beast from the East song on YouTube, you are as likely to run into it saying Canibus, Beast from the East, as if it was Canibus's song, even though it's a Lost Boyz song. That's how synonymous Canibus is with that song, and how much he made you forget anybody else was on the track. He makes you wonder, why did anybody else bother showing up? And it's interesting because they gave him a long leash to just keep on going with line after line. And I can't overstate how advanced his battle bars, if you will, were. And what I mean by that is Canibus kind of mastered jaw-dropping rap. You know what I mean? Like, you've got lyricists who are able to rap really fast and do a whole bunch of little lyrical tricks like that, right? You've got other rappers who are very good storytellers. You've got another brand of rapper who are masters of basically making threats. Not necessarily violent threats, although it can be violent threats. And it's not exactly like gangster rap style where you're actually talking as if you're gonna meet this person in the streets and you're gonna you're gonna smoke them. It's not that kind of threat, but it's when you're basically threatening the proverbial whack MC. Basically, you're talking about this kind of straw man that's not really there, but you are launching your rhymes, attacking that hypothetical rapper. Now, sometimes you could be battling a real MC with those battle bars, like Canibus notoriously did against LL Cool J, then against Wyclef, and Canibus over the years, mistake by mistake, kind of either bit the hand that fed him as he was ascending the ranks in hip hop, and then way later, and I'm talking in the 2010s, he had a battle with this super good battle rapper, and these battle rappers come with 15-minute verses prepared. You know what I mean? They're not necessarily freestyling off the top of their head, but these are the next generation battle writers where they have their whole presentation in order, and they know how they want to kill you in the first round, the second round, and the third round. So you better be coming with 1,000 rhymes if you're going to step into that arena. Well, Canibus, who had a reputation and had some mainstream level success, it was unusual for a rapper of his caliber to step into that type of a battle arena. And he battled one of the best in that realm named Disaster. And I'm not lying when I say that was one of the most disastrous battles I've ever seen in terms of what that did to Canibus's reputation. It was terrible. He brought out a notebook towards the later rounds because he ran out of rhymes and couldn't think of rhymes quick enough to fill up the time in the round that he was given. It was very embarrassing, and to be honest, it was heartbreaking as a longtime Canibus fan to have witnessed that. I even bought like the online pay-per-view to watch that Canibus versus Disaster battle. But years before that downfall, if you will, of Canibus, although he's still recording music to this day, Canibus was the most hyped rapper of his era, or at least of the year and couple of years that he came up. Put it like this: when the Source magazine issued their year-end release and they were giving you like the top rappers to watch for the next year, that year I believe being 1998, the Locks were one of the groups, DMX was one of the rappers, Big Pun was one of the rappers, but they ranked him and Canibus was number one above those other guys that I mentioned. So he was like the number one draft pick rapper. That's why he got these different featured verse spots. He got, you know, with the Lost Boyz, he got Music Makes Me High remix off their first album. LL Cool J featured him in 4 3 2 1, and that was the song that ended up leading to the Canibus versus LL Cool J battles. But you saw like Common feature Canibus on a song called Making a Name for Ourselves from Common's One Day It'll All Make Sense album. You saw Nas's group with AZ and Foxy Brown and Nature called The Firm. Canibus featured on Desperados. And so he was signed to Wyclef at the time. So Wyclef would end up producing Canibus's debut album. But a year before that debut album, Canibus was just going from radio station to radio station, just killing it live on the air with some of these verses, just obliterating any perception of what was possible lyrically. Like, he stretched the imagination. Because think about it. Canibus came before Eminem. In fact, when Eminem was coming up, he would often reference Canibus in his rhymes. Like, Eminem looked up to Canibus once upon a time. And so, yes, I mean, years later, we would get like Lil Wayne. We, you know, in recent years, we get the Drakes and the Kendrick Lamars and Jid and Los. And when I'm naming these guys, I'm talking about some of the most impressive MCs that are also great in that, damn, you don't want to be the guy to come after that guy on the song after he spits a killer verse like that. That's the type of rapper that I'm talking about. And Canibus was one of the best ever at doing that with each and every one of his battle style verses. Now, I do like a few of his albums. I like the first two albums, but I even like not his third album. That was the C Hollywood one where he was basically kind of obsessed over Eminem and kind of portraying the rapper Stan as if Stan was releasing a comeback against Eminem, basically. I didn't really love that one as much, but I like the album after that called Mic Club, The Curriculum. Very good album, super impressive verses once again. I thought the beats were pretty good. And the album after that called Rip the Jacker, produced by Jedi Mind Tricks, Stoop the Enemy of Mankind. That was one of Canibus's best albums, if not his best. But rewind to 1997. Again, he's just going from radio station to radio station, basically scaring MCs. Like, you could see footage of him like in clubs with Mos Def, Big Pun, DMX, and everybody is spitting their verse. But when Canibus is spitting his verse, everybody's just locked in and looking at him like, damn, like, how do you even come up with something like that? It's like, it's super scientific. It's often scientifically correct because a lot of people will use big words or use these like gaudy concepts that they can't really, you know, speak accurately about. Canibus seems like he at least did enough reading and studying to like be able to back up his scientific references with information that leads you to believe, damn, he kind of sounds like he knows what he's talking about here. So yeah, Canibus was one of the most hyped and anticipated rappers before he would then end up battling LL, and then it would start a slow downward descent. But before that, when he was featured on these different songs, one of his first features was on that Lost Boyz song on their second album called Beast from the East with, again, Mr. Cheeks, A+, Redman, and Canibus. I love the beat. I love the way that the song starts. And you know what? If it was just those first three rappers and that was the end of the song, it would have been a cool song. But when Canibus got on the mic, right after Redman wraps up his verse, and think about it, yeah, Canibus is on the heels of a Redman verse. Redman's one of the best rappers ever. And Canibus just comes in like he's shot out of a cannon. Canibus brings the sickest drama, fierce enough to pierce the thickest armor. He just gets into it in a way that only Canibus can. I used to like that delivery. Like when I first started writing rhymes, I was writing it like in the voice of Canibus. That's how much he impacted me. But when I first heard this, because I was a Lost Boyz fan from their last album with Music Makes Me High, the song Renee, Lifestyles of the Rich and Shameless. But yeah, I was a Lost Boyz fan, so I was already excited about this album in '97 coming out. So then I get to the song Beats from the East and I'm listening to this guy, and this was the first time I had ever heard Canibus, because again, this is before a lot of those features that I'm mentioning. This is before that. And there wasn't like a music video to this song. It wasn't like a single. It did make the Source magazine's Fat Tape, where they kind of pick some of the coolest album non-single cuts. But yeah, Canibus comes in and he's dropping lines that I had never heard before, like in terms of rhymes being that damn impressive. Again, this is jaw-dropping rap. I am spitting each one of these lines to impress the listener with my turn of phrase, with my metaphors, with how I could connect one idea or thought to another and then tie it in a very devastating sounding rhyme with a delivery that just kind of makes it even that much more piercing. No, Canibus was checking all of these boxes with that verse. In fact, after spitting this verse, which is like longer than 2 minutes long, at the end of it, he's all, now you tell me who's damaging ish. Going once, going twice, sold to that named Canibus. But even before that, earlier in the verse, he says, F y'all, you don't impress me and no one can test me. An MC so ill I got AIDS scared to catch me. An MC so ill I've got AIDS scared to catch me. When I heard that, I was like, whoa. Because think about it. Your favorite MC probably came after this Canibus verse and came after Canibus. So it's always easy to look at like today's rap and say, well, Lil Wayne said this on, the Drought 3 or some project like that, or Eminem said this and this and this. It all came after Canibus was dropping these bars right here. But an MC so ill I got AIDS scared to catch me. He said, playing with the mic is something I won't do. My only concern when I approach you is to roast you. I'll smoke you and every man that you're standing close to. Have every man in your crew deny that he knows you. He said, what's the matter with y'all? I splatter y'all up against a mother wall with these raw lyrics I catapult. I mean, it was just one after another. He said, I grab mics and push to the left so fast that their hearts end up on their right sides of their chest. Think about it. I push rappers or whatever so fast to the left that their hearts end up on their right side of their chest. I mean, come on. He said, but if you want to battle, I'm down. If you got 9 lives, I'll take 8 of them off your hands right now. I'm like, woo! Like, and I'm telling you, you need to go back, just listen. The song is called Beast from the East. But I'm just dropping this video to say that if you want to hear, at its time, one of the most impressive lyrical verses in hip hop, listen to an emerging, because again, this was an emerging Canibus. This isn't Canibus 10 years later, 20 years later. This is Canibus when he's still building his reputation as one of the most dangerous MCs on the mic. Go back and listen to the Lost Boyz featuring A+. Just type in Lost Boyz, Beast from the East. Or you might just want to type in Beast from the East in case it's Canibus that YouTube has as being the artist behind the song Beast from the East. He's really just the last featured verse, but boy, was that a featured verse. Like, again, when people would talk about rappers at the time, nobody was really wanting the smoke lyrically with Canibus. Like, there are very few rappers that I could recall in modern memory, because I wasn't paying attention to rap during the late 80s and the early 90s. I'm talking about rappers who were so good and so impressive lyrically that it kind of had other MCs like, damn, kind of backing up a little bit. Eminem is one of them. Canibus was one of them. I would say Lil Wayne, for a moment in time, was certainly one of them. Around the time of like the Drought 3, like Lil Wayne would be on tracks with other rappers. Remember when he was just rapping on everybody else's songs, beats and stuff, and he could be on a song with 2 or 3 other rappers and just make them sound amateur, basically just making them sound less interesting. Like what they had to say was actually less interesting. That's how good Canibus was. When Canibus, he said, years later, he would say, I meant it when I said nobody can shine on a song that features me. That's why I said it so vehemently. But yeah, Canibus was that nice. And he was, again, I mean, if you like what you hear in that verse, feel free to dive into at least the first 4 to 5 albums of Canibus's catalog. I haven't heard his most recent stuff, even though a buddy of mine, Omar, was actually just featured on a Canibus track like 1 or 2 years ago, like maybe even less than a year ago. He goes by Ofrap. You can find that on Spotify. But yeah, for a moment in time, Canibus was certainly one of my absolute favorite MCs, and it was verses like this that won me over and made me a Canibus fan. So give Beast from the East a listen. Again, it's one of those where you're like, why did those other 3 guys even hop on that track with Canibus? Like, it's almost like they were all very aware that Canibus had by far the best and longest, but best verse by far on that song. And it was ahead of its time. It was people were not rapping verses like that in 1997 before Canibus was. Canibus really, he threw the gauntlet so far ahead that it would take some time, like a couple years it would take like the Eminem era a couple years later for any rappers to really catch up with that advanced a rhyme style. And I get it. A lot of people will like other rappers from the time Canibus was coming up more than Canibus. Sometimes they just don't care for his voice, or sometimes they would prefer like a Mos Def, just a well-rounded rapper, Black Thought. I mean, Canibus doesn't often show up in people's like top 10 rappers of all time, right? He hasn't sustained that type of reputation. I mean, he kind of had you could say he had a disappointing career, even though I do like a few of his albums. It's just some of the decisions that he made sort of got him blackballed from the game, essentially. But yeah, let me know if you have heard that Beast from the East verse, what you thought about it. And let me know if you have any favorite Canibus albums or songs or features. Because again, through 97 and into 98, I mean, he was on Wyclef's Gone Till November remix with R. Kelly, I believe. He was on a Pharoah Monch song called Hell from Pharoah Monch's Internal Affairs album. So yeah, 97, 98, Canibus was absolutely killing it. I remember having a blank CD just full of Canibus's radio features, because he was spitting like these fresh new verses on like Hot 97 or with like DJ Clue or Funk Master Flex. Like, he was making his rounds, just killing it live in studio. Try to find some of that as well, because those are some other Canibus highlights. But yeah, it was really Beast from the East that kind of set the table and that launched the reputation of Canibus. Let me know your thoughts once you give it a listen, or if you've already given it a listen, let me know your thoughts on that. And what do you think of Canibus overall, just as an MC? I'd love to know your thoughts. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love music like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.